Those videos, though, also show that the vast majority of these actions have been peaceful and that there are lots of folks just trying to be heard on the streets in and around L.A.
A few moments later.
When I look at some of these protesters, they are not resembling the people who were here when all of this began earlier this morning in Los Angeles. This crowd is different. And so now you have a problem for law enforcement trying to contain these people.
So one of the most fascinating trends that we've been witnessing ever since the rioting broke out in Los Angeles County on Friday night is watching the mainstream media, and I suppose to a lesser extent, even some Democrats have to slowly admit reality, right? Having to slowly come to grips with the fact that, number one, it is not mostly peaceful protesting that is going on in LA. Yes, there is a serious problem. Yes, it needs to be put under control, which implicitly is an argument that maybe Donald Trump deploying the National Guard was not actually a crazy idea. As a matter of fact, I'd go so far as to argue he's not doing enough, right? National Guard should not just be used to defend federal facilities because Gavin Newsom doesn't want them elsewhere. We should be using the National Guard en masse to restore order in the city of Los Angeles. But, that's number one. But also number two here, watching as the media has to slowly accept and admit the fact that when it comes to the wider context here, right, the wider issue being debated, Donald Trump's immigration agenda, the mass deportations, it turns out they're actually overwhelmingly popular with the American people because, as it turns out, indeed, as we say all the time, we did vote for this. We are getting what we voted for, and it is not much of a compelling argument for the Democrats who are currently, dealing with an approval rating that is low in the 20s to say, oh, let's salvage all of this by making a stand. This is how we're going to recover our party, is by defending the supposed rights of illegal aliens and, in many cases, violent criminal illegals directly. Now, that said, we want to get into this here today where CNN, you'll see them slowly go from like, Trump is an authoritarian, everything is fine, to, of course, wait a minute, Trump might have a point. And again, those approval numbers really do tell you the story. First, though, folks, do us a favor. If you enjoy the content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Subscribing, after all, is the best way to support these videos and ensure that you never miss one of them. Turn on notifications while you're at it. And with that in mind, we already covered on Saturday night, as I'm sure many of you saw, but we'll briefly recap here, the way in which CNN was trying to frame what was going on in Los Angeles as mostly peaceful and, of course, under control, which the entire time it really never was. But let's just flash back to remember the fact this indeed did happen.
We are having an administration that's targeting peaceful protests, people that are there to protest. The president is sending the National Guard because he doesn't like the scenes. He doesn't like the scenes of people peacefully protesting.
And it wasn't just that one girl. You can go watch our video. But of course, we also covered the way in which Brian Stelter went on a 4-minute rant as Trump deployed the National Guard, basically saying nothing of note was really happening. LAPD is handling it. Of course, Gavin Newsom also said the same exact thing. LAPD has this under control. 24 hours later, he's like, please stop committing violence. Wait, what violence? I thought there was none. Nonetheless, we want to cover this. We got to hold everyone accountable. So take a look here at the moment on June 9th, just yesterday night, that CNN finally throws in the towel and is no longer calling these things mostly peaceful. As a matter of fact, they have to admit it, right? This is glorious to see. You are looking at live pictures where protests have taken a violent turn in the situation that we're looking at right now. These are self-driving cars that you can clearly see people who proclaim to be protesters are stomping on them. We've seen them lighting on fire, taking selfies with them, kicking them. We've seen law enforcement also on horseback trying to disperse the crowd. Gee, you don't say. So what you're saying, ladies and gentlemen, is there is actually something happening, right? Donald Trump was not responding to nothing, every single time, right? This is the conspiracy theory, misinformation arc to actually it's just what's going on. Whether this type of stuff happened with COVID, inflation, immigration in 2024, by the way, many other issues. For years, Democrats will just shoot down what we're saying. They deny us, they call us crazy. And then later on, they quietly admit, oh, maybe they were right. But we never get the credit. Notice that. Notice how CNN is not going out and saying, yes, Donald Trump is right. There is a problem. Oh, he was trying to get ahead of this. Oh, that makes perfect sense. But nonetheless, here it is. We got to show you the iconic moment when they finally admit, guys, it's not a mostly peaceful protest.
You are in the CNN newsroom. I'm Jessica Dean in New York. We are following breaking news out of Los Angeles tonight. You are looking at live pictures where protests have taken a violent turn in this situation that we're looking at right now. These are self-driving cars that clearly you see people who proclaim to be protesters are stomping on them. We've seen some of them lighting them on fire, taking selfies with them, kicking them. We've also seen law enforcement on horseback trying to disperse the crowd. Now, zooming out for a second, let me take you to where we are right now. This is after several days of ICE raids in.
Of course, you have to also love the moment where, again, right, what did Gavin Newsom say? What was the media saying? LAPD has this under control. Finally, okay, 2 days into the fact, they finally admit here, guys, and I quote that quote, law enforcement has a problem in Los Angeles. LA is in for a rough night. Yeah, gee, you don't say. Maybe that's why we had this bold idea. Oh, law enforcement is not handling it. Let's deploy the National Guard. Oh, that's martial law. Oh, how dare you do that? Interesting, right?
To CNN's Kyung Law, who has been standing by all day. Kyung, a lot has happened since we've been talking to you. Where are you now? What is the status where you are?
Well, there are multiple protests now, or at least we should call them incursions between the people who've been demonstrating here, people who've joined in, and law.
Wait, what? They're not just protests? Huh? Wait, huh? I thought they were peaceful protests. Why would you employ the National Guard? Oh, now it's an incursion. Oh, interesting. It's like we're right about everything, huh?
Enforcement. We are near where all of this began, and what you're seeing here is a line of a mix of, though predominantly federal agents, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol, as well as the National Guard that brought out some of these protesters. But you can see they've created quite some space between them and then these protesters. That violence that you were referring to, Jess, you can see that there's a car burning in the background. And while they've made a semicircle here on the street, you can see that the Waymo over there has been vandalized. And we understand that some cars over there may also be Waymos that have been set on fire. So this is a part of the night that law enforcement really worries about, because when I look at some of these protesters, they are not resembling the people who were here when all of this began earlier this morning in Los Angeles. This crowd is different. And so now you have a problem for law enforcement trying to contain these people, whoever they may be, some of them who may have some legitimate concerns, but then also other people who are mixed in.
Yeah, well, doesn't that just tell you everything, right? Breaking news, nothing is happening. 2 moments later. Breaking news, something is happening. Donald Trump was right, but he's still bad. He's still bad. Okay, so I just wanted to start off this video by playing that to admit like phase one here of why Trump was right the entire time, to say, yes, the situation in LA is bad. Yes, it was out of control. And yes, that's exactly why we deployed the National Guard in a limited capacity, I might add, to simply, protect federal facilities, which I will once again go on to say, there's an argument to be made. They should have been deployed to the entire city, okay? Because clearly LAPD is not handling it correctly. And, you can say whatever you want about, oh, it's Trump's deployment that escalated the situation. But it's like, maybe to some degree, I don't know. But also use your common sense here. You saw what happened in 2020, okay? In 2020, what happened infamously in Minneapolis? Tim Walz stood around with his you-know-what in his hand and, refused to deploy the Guard for days. It just kept escalating. What did Trump say this time around? How about we deploy the Guard and get serious about this before the situation gets out of control? By the way, if you don't like that, if you have such an issue with it, then tell me here why LAPD, who supposedly everything is fine, it's all in hand, it clearly does not have anything in hand. So nonetheless, all right, so that's phase one. Phase two, though, here, right? We got to also talk, frankly, about the wider picture here. Because as I so often say, if Democrats think this type of behavior is going to somehow be a political victory for them, they're completely missing the plot. What these violent insurrectionists, rioters, agitators, many other words we could use, are protesting against in a small minority of a small part of this country, which is Los Angeles County, right? Not a small part of this country, but you know what I mean. In the context of the wider nation as a whole, the whole country is not LA County. So when people say the American people are rising up, The American people are whiter than Los Angeles. When you go outside of that, as it turns out, the hill here, as they so often do, they always pick the wrong battles, right? The hill that Democrats are choosing to die on is actually massively unpopular. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump's numbers are still good on immigration. Some would argue they're only getting better amidst all of this drama. So take a listen here for yourself as Harry Enton, of all people, goes through the numbers, pretty indisputable, by the way. There's many more polls we could cite, but points out to the Democrats, actually, despite all of the panic, despite all of the chaos, kill Mario Garcia, let's fly to El Salvador, let's riot, let's protest. No, they're only playing right into Trump's hands because I will reiterate here, right? The American people indeed did vote for mass deportations. They voted for exactly what Trump is trying to ramp up and get more aggressive about right now.
You know, if we just take a look at the baseline numbers here, this is Trump's net approval rating on immigration. It's gone up like a rocket. Compare now versus 8 years ago during Trump's first term. Look at this. In his first term, Trump was way underwater at minus 21 points. But look at this. He's up over 20 points. Now, in the aggregate, he is in positive territory at plus 1 point on his net approval rating. Some other polls even have it a little bit higher than that. There is no issue on which Trump is doing so much better than he was in his first term, more than the issue of immigration. No wonder the Times has written up the way that he is. Trump is begging for a fight on this because he knows what he's doing so far is working with the American electorate.
Where does immigration rank on issues for him? How is he doing compared to other issues?
Yeah, so I think what's so important is it is his top issue so far. And the reason it is his top issue is because take a look at the individual nuggets in here. Why are people approving of Trump on immigration, approve of these different immigration actions? Well, Trump's administration's program to deport those here illegally. Look at this, 54% approval. How about agents searching your hometown for those that they think are here illegally? Again, positive territory here, above 50% for Donald Trump. So it's not just on the broad issue of immigration where Trump is doing well. It's on the specifics. When you dive into the issues, Trump is above 50% and his actions are above 50%, at least with those most directly connected to what's going on right now out in Los Angeles.
So Donald Trump, the president, picking a fight on this, and to an extent, you see Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, a Democrat, and the California Governor Gavin Newsom pushing back. So what do voters see in terms of their perceptions of Republicans, the president, or Democrats, say Gavin Newsom, on this issue?
Yeah, the American electorate believe that the Democrats don't have a clue on the issue of immigration. I mean, you could just take it here. Closer to trust more in immigration, Democrats versus Republicans. Got three different polls for you across the board. They all tell the same story. Republicans lead on the issue of immigration. You see it here, CBS +6. You see it here, CNN +6. You see it here, Ipsos, even bigger, +19. No matter what poll you look at, no matter which way you cut it, the American public is with the Republicans. The American public is with Donald Trump, and to a much greater extent than they were in term number one. And it's not just on the broad issue of immigration, it's on the specifics as well, in which the American public is with Donald Trump and the Republicans. And that is why Donald Trump is eager to take on this fight and eager for those scenes out of Los Angeles.
I was just going to use that word, eager. This explains.
Yeah, I mean, as I so often say, Democrats are just taking the bait here, right? You know, because they seem to have this misunderstanding that, oh, if we pull on people's heartstrings because we're the liberals, you know, people will say, oh, that's cruel, that's unjust, look at the sob stories. I think what they fundamentally misunderstand is, you could argue to an extent, the American people have become radically opposed on this issue. And you know who radicalized them? Joe Biden, right? I think maybe perhaps 10 years ago. You could make a case that, like, oh, compassionate card, let's, you know, reach some type of middle ground on immigration, amnesty bill, whatever. Maybe at the end of Obama's first term that would have been viable. But what's happened since, right, is that especially the past 4 years, the left has pushed so far on this issue that people's sympathy card has run out. They're like, okay, how many people have to be hurt and suffer and damaged by this migration crisis before America finally decides its charity is over? And I frankly think that's exactly where we are right now. You know, I recently, you guys will see it maybe in the next couple of days, but today earlier I was recording I guess you could say debate. I think it was really more of a discussion. I didn't really see it as a debate, but a conversation with Anna Kasparian of TYT over on Brad Palumbo's channel. And look, Anna is someone that I respect, right? One of the few people on the left I actually do respect. I think that she is a good faith actor. I think, you know, she makes arguments that are reasonable, or at the very least well thought out, even if I don't agree with them. So, you know, I have nothing against Anna. But with that in mind, you know, when we were talking about this, and one issue she brought up to me is she said, look, I think that when you look at the left, and she acknowledges this obviously, from like 2008 to 2024, they sort of lost what you could call their cultural mandate, right? They went from being the majority in America, widely accepted. At the end of the Bush years, the right wing were seen as like this small, crazy minority faction of like weirdos and freaks and all this stuff. And then suddenly, years later, it has inversed itself because basically the left pushed too far. And she said to me, she's like, you know, aren't you fearful, essentially, that if Trump keeps pushing so hard on immigration, the right wing's going to be in the same position? And I said to her, look, I totally understand that argument, right? We need to figure out as the right wing how to avoid the mistakes of the left and like, you know, basically pushing so ridiculously hard on these fringe minority wrong hills to die on instead of like broadly, you know, creating an agenda that is at least compelling to the American people, I'll say it. But what I said to her is, I pointed this stuff out, right? I basically told her, I was like, look, I understand that point 100%, but every single poll, time after time, shows, as Harry Enton there points out, not just on the broad issue of immigration, but on these specifics, the American people overwhelmingly support this. And even polls that we saw in the month of May, for instance, that were like negative to Trump, right? They showed Trump's approval rating being in the negatives or whatever. Still, every single time you find the approval rating, the popularity on the specific issue of immigration always outpaces Trump by about like 5 to 10 points, right? He is more popular on immigration and deportation issues. Every single poll shows this, by the way, than he is broadly popular just generally as a president, which is to say this. The answer is no, right? I do not think that this will be the issue where we push too far on. As a matter of fact, the American people are currently saying, keep pushing, right? Push even harder, maybe perhaps. And I think this is frankly a thing that dates back years, maybe even about a decade now, which is both political parties, but especially the Democrats, the mainstream in both, seem to misunderstand actually how the American people feel about the issue of immigration, right? And it turns out many of the immigration policies currently being enforced, the American people did not specifically vote for, right? They voted for candidates, but they voted for candidates to do other things. Now they're getting conned. And now, right, what's happening? The Democrat Party going into 2026, I think, is about to find out if they stick to this issue, if they don't figure out how to move on, how to stand out of the way, how to, you know, duck and weave, whatever. They're going to find out how the American people really feel about this stuff. Again, Donald Trump is right. You could argue in 2015 he was ahead of the curve on immigration, but now he has the broad support of the American public. And guys, it is not close, right? Talk about any issue in modern America, considering how divided we are, right? We're basically a 50-50 nation within the margin of error. To be between +6 to +10 to even Ipsos is pointing out +19 on any political issue, that is overwhelming, okay? You know, nothing short of men and women's sports. Is there any issue in this country that Donald Trump and the Republican Party is more popular on than the issue of immigration security, border security, and deporting illegal aliens? And CNN is now admitting that. About time to find out here if Democrats ever come to admit that, or the Trump derangement syndrome consumes them so much, they're going to go into the 2026 midterms basically, you know, dying on the hill of, hey, we're the party of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And so you are. Thank you for informing us of that for months, by the way. We're the party that waves the Mexican flag while burning stuff to the ground. Yeah, see how the American people feel, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, as you can see here, okay, the change over time is striking. And Democrats, again, I think are about to be in for a rude reality check on this very issue.
Let's just sort of start off on the fact that immigrant citizens, immigrant voters, foreign-born voters have gone tremendously to the right on this issue in 2024 and 2025 versus where they were in 2020. Closest to or trust more in immigration. You go back to 2020. Democrats, get this, held a 32-point lead on this issue. Immigrant voters were in the Democratic camp. Jump forward to 2024, 2025. Look at that shift, a 40-point shift to the right among immigrant voters. Republicans now lead on this issue by 8 points over Democrats, more so than any other group that I could find. The group of voters who became more hawkish on immigration were in fact immigrants themselves, immigrants who are registered to vote in this country.
So that's on that issue. How about how they feel about kind of traditionally, historically about Donald Trump?
Yeah. So, you know, you see this shift and you go, what is going on underneath the hood? Well, take a look, Donald Trump. You remember when he first ran back in 2016, immigrant voters were one of his weakest spots. But look at this. Trump's vote share in presidential elections among, again, immigrant citizens, those who are registered to vote. Look at this. In 2016, he got 36% of the vote. You go to 2020, 39% of the vote. Look at this. In 2024, all the way up to 47% of the vote. Some polls I looked at had him barely losing that vote. Some polls I looked at had him barely winning that vote. Again, there is no block of voters that shifted more to the right from 2020 to 2024 than immigrant voters. And Donald Trump, at least in some surveys, actually won that vote. On average, it's about equal. So there may be all this stuff, right, about undocumented immigrants and Trump being harsh on them, but immigrant voters themselves have increasingly liked Donald Trump and have increasingly moved to the right on immigration into the Republican camp.
Well, then on that, what you're getting at, how immigrant citizens, voters, feel about people in the country illegally.
Yeah, and this is where it all kind of comes together, Kate Baldwin. Look at this. The net favorable rating, immigrants who are here illegally, among immigrant citizens, again, those registered to vote. In 2020, look at this, plus 23 points on the net favorable rating. But look at where we were in 2024, minus 6 points, underwater.
Nobody's surprised by this. Actually, I think the only people surprised right now are maybe consultants or Los Angeles Democrats saying, what? What, the rest of the country doesn't support this? The rest of the country didn't think that Joe Biden was an amazing president for opening the border, I should say. How could this be, right? So now the question I think really has to be, at what point do Democrats take the hint, if ever? I don't think that it's going to be ever, frankly. Because despite all this talk about how, we need to introspect after the election, we need to figure it out. Again, they're consumed by Trump derangement syndrome. They just don't understand this, and frankly, they never will. And perhaps maybe one could make the argument, honestly, that the ship has sailed years ago on this issue already, right? Democrats basically made a calculus sometime around like the, second term of Obama, whenever it was, that, hey, if we import millions of people into this country and, we make sure we selectively engineer it so that they're a gigantic political voting base for us, we'll never need the actual people of this country ever again, right? We'll never even need the natural born citizens or whatever. And so maybe now at this point, right, they're just totally stuck to that fact. They refuse to move. They're like, no, because why is it, right? Why are they fighting so hard for illegal aliens when the vast majority of this country is against what they're doing? Well, it's of course very simple, right? The illegal aliens are their constituency, right? That's their actual side. Those are the actual people they support. Same thing, on Doge with, for instance, like the welfare fraud, right? Medicare fraud, Social Security fraud, all this stuff. People ask the question, right? How could you be against fraud, waste, and abuse, or going after fraud, waste, and abuse? Simple answer, because the Democrat constituency, newsflash, largely includes perhaps the type of people who are abusing government programs and illegal aliens, etc., right? The natural born or even like naturalized in many cases, right? Hardworking legal citizens of this country, Democrat Party, they've long understood they have no place for, right? They can't figure out how to make a message that actually compels to those types of people. So instead, what do, right? Let's import a bunch of voters instead, As you can see here, by the way, amidst all of the chaos, amidst all of the grandstanding by Democrats, surely the American people won't stand for this. As you can see, according to Morning Consult, which is a left-wing pollster, by the way, okay, not historically favorable to Trump, people probably know that, Donald Trump's approval rating in the month of June has increased by a net of 8 points. This poll was conducted between June 3rd and June 9th, which is obviously yesterday in the United States. And it now shows Donald Trump at a +6 approval rating, as you can see, right? That is, again, an 8-point increase from where it was in last month. Again, Democrats, are you going to take the hint about this? Deportations are popular. The American people support this. And newsflash, right? Burning down American cities to oppose a policy that is once again popular, maybe is not the way to salvage your political party, nor is, the image of the guy burning the car with the Mexican flag, the Waymos and all this stuff, nor is that a very compelling argument to perhaps sway people's opinions in the other direction. As you can see, Harry Anton brought this up as well. But yes, in 2017, Democrats had a +11 approval rating on the issue of immigration. In 2019, that is now +19, 30-point shift to the Republicans. I don't even know how, that is astronomical. Like, that is insane. That is crazy. Okay. Nonetheless, I do also want to point out, Democrats, with all of that in mind, I don't think that taking on political messaging like this is exactly going to help your case as the American people continue to overwhelmingly and resoundingly tell you, no, we don't want open borders. No, we don't want to defend violent criminals. Take a listen.
I'm from LA. I was born in LA. That's where my roots are. That's where I started my career. It is almost 50% Hispanic. Remember that California was part of Mexico. All of the Southwest is Mexico. So the roots are really deep in that region. And what they're saying is, no, not in our our community. Because when they're coming in, even though there's second, third, fourth, fifth generation Latinos that live there and Mexican Americans that live there, some of them might be their family members. The people that they're going after, it's personal for them because they're going after their cousin and their uncle and their parents. And how does that make us safe?
So the American Southwest is Mexico, guys. Not only is their agenda here apparently to defend the rioters, they're going to go so far as to make statements like that, right? It's good that they're flying the Mexican flag. Yeah, how dare you even fly the American one? Don't you know you're on stolen land? Again, Democrats. Okay, you know what? Fair enough. I'm tired of arguing on this issue. Just run into 2026. Let's do it, right? Let's make the whole thing a referendum on immigration. See how that works out for you. Go ahead. To all the people who say, oh, the American people are going to turn on Donald Trump and his deportations because of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, right? Even Anna was trying to basically make that argument. Where is it? Where's the proof of that, right? The American people are going to turn because the National Guard. Okay, the National Guard's being deployed what? Because of images of Democrat voters burning cars, waving the Mexican flag. Which side, honestly, do you think the average voter in, let's say, Michigan or Pennsylvania, which side do you think they're going to see as crazier? The people who are rioting or the people who are trying to stop the rioting? You know, but generally, your average voter out there, right? How do you think they feel about this? How do you think they felt about Joe Biden's open border? You don't have to speculate. Ask them. Look at poll after poll after poll. You know, you can go on to say, oh, one poll is wrong. You know, sometimes polls get it wrong. Okay. This is an overwhelming trend you've seen since 2024. Immigration. The American people keep loudly screaming, immigration. We agree with Trump on immigration. Minority party is doing exactly what a minority party would do, which is, oh, let's keep being in the minority. Good job. With that said, guys, let me know your thoughts. We'll just keep that in the video. Why not? That's kind of funny. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.